All right, so this is going to be the beginning of a series of workshops on facilitating multi-stakeholder collaboration. I don't know how long ago it was, but in the last season, before the Good Growth Conference, I did run a session on facilitating collaborative dialogue, and there was a request from a lot of people on that workshop to do like a deeper dive into what this meant. So we're responding to that request, and this is going to be the beginning of a dive, and each one we're going to go deeper into a particular principle that we have defined. So next slide, please, Matías. Great, so I just wanted to start with like, well, what is multi-stakeholder collaboration? And you'll see that on the left-hand side, there's a diagram here, and it really is, this comes from the Wageningen University Guide on Multi-Stakeholder Partnerships, and it looks at, you know, the different purposes or the different reasons why you might engage in a multi-stakeholder collaborative process, and that some of them can be problem focused, so what can we do together to solve this problem? Others can be conflict focused, as in there's an existing conflict and we say, right, let's finally sit down and find a way forward, you know, out of this. And then the other one can be very opportunity focused, like let's join forces and create more value for all of us, or new ideas for all of us. And I think my sense of the world right now, I just want to acknowledge, you know, the time where we're doing all this work, we've got serious fires going on in the Amazon and serious fires going on in Indonesia, and carbon usage is not going down. That, you know, we're probably in a situation where we need to do all three of those, right? So, and we certainly haven't found solutions in the last 20 to 30 years that are working, technical solutions. That could be because there's conflict. It could be because we haven't thought of another opportunity. So I just feel like right now, there isn't a bigger time in the world where collaboration has been necessary, right? It's so necessary to be able to get to where we want to go and have a planet for us to live on in the future, so that, you know, the human species continues to exist. So what we've done in terms of defining it is to look at specifically these things, that they involve interactive learning, empowerment, which we'll talk a lot more about later, and participatory governance. So it's not just one person making all the decisions. That means that stakeholders are interconnected, and they can look at opportunities, ambitions, and problems in relation to the sustainability of something. The thing is that often people have different interests along a value chain that's normal, right? And one of the key tenets of this is that they are collectively innovative, resilient, and adaptive when they look at risks, crises, opportunities, or complex problems. And all of us here on the phone work on complex problems. We're not working on a problem of like, how do I make the recycling get sorted more efficiently? It's a complex system problem that's at a very large scale. And I just want to say, like, bringing about such multi-stakeholder collaboration is not easy. You know, no pretending that it's easy. It really requires like a deep understanding of what enables and what stops people from working together. Yeah. So we need to have patience, we need to give it time, we need commitment from leaders who are excited about the possibility of this kind of collaboration. And the great news is, you know, that with the right mindset, tools, and approach and methodologies, you really can create significant shifts inside big systems. So that's why, you know, we do a lot of this work on multi-stakeholder collaboration and believe that it's really one of the key ways to make systems more sustainable, agricultural commodity systems in particular. Next slide, please, Matías. So I put this photo here because it feels like the facilitator is a bit like, I don't know if any of you have ever been whitewater rafting or rowing, but there's always somebody sitting at the back who's got the rudder or is like instructing the people what speed to go. Like when someone's doing a rowing race, there's a person who sits there and says, okay, you know, pull, 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 like that. And really for me, I was like, what that for me is what a facilitator is. They're not deciding things or leading the charge or doing necessarily all the work, because everybody's got a paddle, but they're like the rudder, you know, and the key person who keeps the people who keep the rhythm of the work going. So I wanted just to say that I think facilitation is like the oil, right, that lubricates collaboration, and it's like the thing that looks after process and relationships, and it's super essential for all multi-stakeholder collaboration work. So you can, maybe that image helps you to think about, you know, what that might look like for your work in terms of facilitation. Next slide, Matías, please. So I want you just to take a moment, and you can close your eyes if you want, and then we're going to do a round of sharing afterwards. Just what if you imagine a facilitator, picture a facilitator that you would like to work with or have worked with. And just imagine, like, what do you see? How do they make you feel in the room? What's the experience that you have when you imagine a facilitator? And then let's hear from some folks, like what are you seeing when you imagine a facilitator? What do you think of? And remember to unmute.
It's Jim here. So
hi, Jim.
I would say they're an individual who can create a context or a venue or a space where a group of different individuals from different backgrounds or perspectives who may have a common interest or have a common issue they need to work through to resolve can engage with one another, agree on defining what that issue or interest or that problem is, and create the space for developing some form of integrative solution or approach.
Mm-hmm. Great, great. Thank you. Anyone else? What do you see when you see a facilitator? Yeah.
So it's Sharon here. I think for me, what's really important in a facilitator is somebody who actually listens. Because if you don't listen to the participants, the delegates that are there, then you've completely missed your role. So I think listening is quite important.
Great. Yeah, totally. Thank you.
Sandra, I think that one of the challenges of the facilitator is to feel everybody to be part of, you know, of this space, that Jim was mentioning, to have the skills to feel everybody that have the power, you know, to participate. And I think this is one is very, very difficult to engage everybody and feel, and to feel everybody that they have a voice in this process.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And it is difficult for sure. It requires a lot of work, like in the room and outside the room beforehand as well. Great, thanks, Sandra. We have time for one more. Anyone else want to share?
Yes, hi.
Hi.
Yeah, what facilitator has a little bit of skills in hosting and the art of hosting, and make everybody is include. It's a kind and participate and lead the participation.
Great. Yes. So you can click for me, Matías, please. I'm just going to show you all of what you all said is totally true. And then this is just like another way of looking at it, right? And that the facilitator is all of these things, you know? So they're conveners, as in they can be the people that organize and bring actors together. They can be the ones that initiate and create the momentum for interaction. They can also be the one that gets political support, obtains political support. So this is more the facilitation of the work that happens outside of the room, like not in the meeting, but outside of the room. Because facilitating multi-stakeholder collaboration isn't only inside meetings, right? It happens all the time outside of meetings. You all know this from your work, that there's all sorts of conversations that happen one-to-one, stakeholder consultations that are specialist for particular minority groups, etc. They can also be a catalyst. So they can create like a sense of urgency or stimulate people to think outside of the box, and also help develop or implement new and bold solutions. So normally in this, like, as you said, Sharon, like as a sink or a place of deep listening to many, many people, it gives them the possibility to come up with like, oh, there's a new solution that I've heard from 5 different people at different times that potentially needs to be discussed by many more people. And then the classic role of the moderator inside of a room, right? So we mentioned engaging in learning and listening, managing differences, empowering stakeholders, making sure that collaboration is really there. Yeah, so let's go to the next slide, please, Matías. Just want to show you. So how many of you have been in meetings like this? You can put your hand up. Right? Yeah. So this is what a poorly facilitated meeting looks like. Next slide, please, Matías. And then this is what well-facilitated meetings have moments like this, right? They're very engaging, interactive. People are thinking, people are working together, people are listening. So we're like, let's have more meetings like this and less meetings like the one before where everybody's falling asleep and is a bit bored, basically, not that engaged at all. Next slide, please, Matías. So I wanted to make sure that, you know, this workshop, we've got 60 minutes left, attends as much as possible, because obviously I've prepared slides, but I also want to know what kind of questions you are in your work so that I can make it as relevant as possible for you. So we're going to put you in pairs now so that you can have a conversation about, well, what questions are you in now about facilitating multi-stakeholder dialogue and collaboration? What are you curious about? What are the challenges that you're facing? So what questions are you in now? And we're just going to give you a couple of minutes each to do that. So Matías is going to put you into pairs, and you will receive a flash thing on your screen that will say, please join this pair conversation, and you just have to click accept. And then we'll send you a notification to bring you back into the large room, the virtual room. Any questions about that process? The technological process?
There's one quick thing. Just give me 1 or 2 minutes to get it done.
Great.
So a little patience.
Yes.
Thank you.
So for those, while we're waiting, for those of you on the phone, on the Zoom, who attended the Good Growth Conference but missed the ending, this was the ending. So this is one of the moments of connecting and completing.
I'm almost there.
Great. And for those of you on the phone who don't have your video enabled, this is the moment to enable it, because you're going to go into a conversation with one person. It'd be nice if you can see them, if that's possible for you on your device.
Cool. So here we go.
Okay, thanks, Matías. So Matías, for those people who have not gone into a pair, are they not accepting or?
Yes.
Okay. So Rini, Anga, Andreas, and Carolina, and Rifdan, in a minute you're going to receive on your screen an invitation. If you can resend it, Matías, can you do that?
They have it already on the screen.
Okay.
They just need to click it.
Yeah, you can just click it.
Yep.
Great. I think it's just Carolina and Rini left. Oh, and Anga again. Okay, we'll just leave it like that. It's fine, Matías.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm going to time it.
CDLRT. We are
Carolina.
not. Carolina de la Rosa.
No, from the Amazon Sustainable Landscape Project in Peru.
Yeah. One second.
Hello, Carolina is here.
Hello. Hi, Carolina. Give me a second. Let me send you to one room, okay? There you go. You need to accept it. Lisa, would you like to join Andreas in one room?
No, you can just add him to make it 3.
Yeah, I will do that.
And then Matías, if you can send, I just sent you some text on the chat to send for the, just to broadcast to them to remind them what they're doing.
Hi, Lisa. Could you send it to the one that says Green Commodities Program instead of Matías?
Yeah.
Because the Matías is my phone, so it's.
Okay.
Thank you. Oh, there it is. Hello, Anga.
Yes, I'm
Hello.
only one in the room 6.
Oh, let me send you to another one. Give me 1 second. You need to accept the invitation, and I just send it to you. All right.
So let's give them 3 more minutes, Matías, because yeah.
I love that picture of Jairo, and
Yeah.
That's Rebecca or Vanessa.
Rebecca.
Rebecca. Oh, it's.
No, Rebecca. He's hugging Rebecca, and on the right is Vanessa.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So you can give them a 1-minute warning. It's a countdown. They get a 1-minute countdown, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you can unshare the screen, Matías. Welcome back. Just gonna wait for all the pairs to come back.
I've never done this before, so I'm quite amazed on how technology can create such, a feature that we can do, like we are in an offline event, something.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. And you can get a free version of Zoom on your computer. So you can play with it. Great. Well, it was nice to see all your faces. Some of you very briefly because you turned your videos off again, but nice to see some of you. So let's just do a little round. Like, what came up from your paired conversations? What questions are you in? What are you caring about most in relation to your work in multi-stakeholder collaboration?
I'm gonna start maybe. So I was in an affair with Nikki, who's driving now. So I'm gonna report back.
Okay.
So we spoke about, like, there were 2 things that we spoke about. One thing was around, like, basically designing events. So how to create this space and have topics which actually will attract the stakeholders, not only to participate physically in the event or the workshop or the dialogue process, but actually be engaged in it. And the second one was like more internal. So it was about acknowledging the different needs and making everyone's voice heard, and not only having, like, for example, in the room, two dominating voices that are only heard. So like understanding those needs and basically acknowledging them as well. So yes, that's what we had in our discussion.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Alex.
Hi, Sandra here. I have a great conversation with Satoko. We met again after the conference, so it was great to talk to her. I'm just going to say one part, and I would like Satoko to talk about the other one. For me, it's like a general question. It's like, it's very difficult to find good facilitators in Costa Rica. So maybe what are the criteria that we need to require in order to find a good facilitator? Because sometimes they know, I mean, they can make a program for the meeting, something like that, but then when they are in the meeting, maybe they don't have the skills that Alex was mentioning, you know, how to deal with the conflict and everything. And Satoko was mentioning some barriers. Satoko, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the challenge that you are facing in Mongolia.
Yes, hi.
Hi.
So we discussed the challenges regarding the language barrier. In my country context, it's a Mongolian and English. And then we expanded our discussion, and we thought about, it's not about the language, but also vocabulary of different sector people use often. The facilitators, good facilitators are those who can sort of combine a space for common language by synthesizing the information that are coming from different stakeholders. They may use different languages to refer to the same concept, which often create a misunderstanding. But then facilitators' skill will allow those conversations to come and merge and converge. So that's the sort of the kind of conversation we had, basically building on the definition of good facilitator.
Great. Yeah, I just want to acknowledge that, you know, for sure, it's hard to find really good facilitators. And, you know, when you're working across an entire value chain, which often we are in our work, as well as with government at multiple levels, you know, national, provincial, district, etc., that, well, I think that the partnership or the collaboration between like the project team or the platform team and the facilitator is really essential. Like that needs to be a really close-knit collaborative relationship as well, in that the facilitator should be really good at process, and then the briefing and the how do you understand the stakeholders often is partly what we need to, you know, equip the facilitator with as well. Right, that difference in language between different people that you mentioned. Do you want to say something else? Is that okay?
No.
No. Okay. Great. Thank you. Anyone else? Do you have time for one more pair? Brittany, you've come off mute. Do you want to share? Okay. Anyone else?
Maybe here.
Sure. Hi, Carolina. Hello.
Hello. Maybe I will say something about in what we are in Peru right now. I am dealing with different platforms. One is for Palm, Coco, and I think it's cattle. All of these three commodities are in different processes. Oh, so
Rennie, can you mute, please? Thanks. Okay.
So I am trying to look for the. We are trying to find, as Satoko mentioned, or Sandra, I think, it's very difficult to find a good facilitator for the kind of platforms that we are thinking to promote for all these commodities. So that's very valuable, but it's something that we don't have here. So I forgot what was my point on it. That I am trying to innovate, and I am working with the RSPO. Mm-hmm. So trying to combine the methodology that they use for facilitate their processes and what we have as a GCP, the methodology that we have in GCP. So I think I hope in some months in the future, maybe in 6 months, I will talk about a little bit how this work with the RSPO work for us.
Great, yeah, that would be really interesting to learn from, for sure.
Lise, may I add something? Mm-hmm. Sorry.
Yeah.
I was wondering. With Carolina was saying that maybe in the apps, if we don't have a good facilitator, what could be the alternative with our own capacity? You know, maybe what could be some, I don't know, techniques or methodology or something that if we don't find like the perfect facilitator to facilitate a process or a meeting or whatever, how can we solve that with mm-hmm. our own capacity?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think ideally you'd hire a facilitation team. I mean, partly also to have like a gender balance of facilitators or language understanding in facilitators. So then also you don't have to have all of these skills in one person, right? You have someone who maybe knows the context of the commodity and therefore all the different speak and the potential conflicts that might exist in the room. And then somebody who knows like how to, design a session, run a session, make it participatory, make sure all the voices are in the room, and that's more their expertise. So, yeah, I think that's one way around it, is to say, maybe this one person doesn't have all the things that we want, but you can have a team of people, and also in that team could be yourselves. Right? You've had exposure to quite a lot of techniques and methodologies and approaches to this. So you, I think, have a lot to offer in terms of the design of a meeting or the way that, how much interaction there is. And so if your facilitator is not delivering how you would like, then you can say, actually, no, in this session, I want to break it and have small breakout groups, just for example. You get to be the person who also briefs the facilitator based on your access to methodologies and whether it's RSPO or this one or other experiences and expertise that you have. I will say for me, when I set up and I was being the CEO of the Better Cotton initiative, which is like RSPO but for cotton, it took a while to find good facilitators in India, Pakistan, China, Brazil, all the countries we're working in. And in the meantime, a lot of my team, we hired teams and we did it, and then we'd have translators and we'd have a local person that helped us understand the stakeholders. But there was a lot of us filling in the gaps to make it as good as we wanted it, So I think that's also a reality.
I have a question here.
Sure.
We are talking about the difficulty of finding a good facilitator. Mm-hmm. But could you define the objectives of facilitation? Mm-hmm. Are we going to collect as many information possible? Are we going to synthesize the information? Are we going to create a
one, common direction? Do we have to I'm pretty sure facilitator will have some objectives, correct?
Yes, but they might change depending on which meeting you're holding and at what stage you're in the process, right? So that early on, you may have a gathering of people, and the facilitation objective is to create a common vision, an alignment around a common vision. That's the objective for the facilitator for that moment in time with those group of stakeholders. And then 3 months later, you might be facilitating something else, which is about, okay, we're going to facilitate looking at different opportunities around the situation of this problem, whatever it is in your context. So you're facilitating objectives towards gathering innovative ideas and opportunities. That could be another objective. So absolutely they need one, but it will be different depending on which meeting you're in, which stage you are in a process. Yeah. I'm going to move us on here just so that we can get into the deep dive. And I want to also share, this might also speak to some of the things we just mentioned, the 5 collaborative dialogue principles that we have. So Matías, if you could share that slide, please. Great. So for those of you who've been with us in the community for a while, you'll notice that these have been updated. We're in the process of upgrading our methodologies at the moment, based on, years of experience and practice. So this workshop, we're going to do a deep dive into working with power, but I just want to touch briefly on all of them as well. And then in the other workshops, we'll delve deeper into the other ones. So we have share expectations, work with power, communicate effectively, foster learning, and move through conflict. And when we talk about share expectations, this is, making sure on a number of levels that people who are participating in the multi-stakeholder collaboration are kind of understanding where they're going. So they have like a common vision or shared vision. They know, like, why are we working together? Why are we here? Also that they have a shared kind of understanding of the process that they're participating in. So they know like the timeline or the direction or how many meetings they're expected to participate in, that kind of thing, so that it's not a surprise. Also what their roles are. So what's their expectation of their role in terms of, are they going to get to make decisions? Are they going to get to vote on things? Are they going to just contribute intelligence, etc., etc.? Then also expectations around how people are going to work together. So sometimes these are called ground rules. They could just be called promises that people make to each other, but how are we going to work together? What's the approach? Very simple things like, are we allowed to take phone calls on our mobile phones in the room or not? What do we all agree to as participants in this discussion around that? And I just want to say that the vision piece, so when you have a common aligned vision, which, might be, let's make all palm oil sustainable in Indonesia, right? That might be the vision. That it's a really important moment where all the stakeholders can go, yeah, regardless of the details and what that looks like to me, I care about that. I want to have sustainable palm oil in Indonesia, and I want that to happen. And to also keep bringing the stakeholders back and reminding them that this is why they're here together. Because when you get deeper into the process, conflicts emerge, people get more attached to their own interests. And so to almost like to have every time you have a gathering or a meeting of people, to have something like a video or a story or something that's like, this is why we're here. That the bigger vision is reminded, right? We remind them of the bigger vision all the time. So that's the piece. And then it's also like for you as kind of coordinators and facilitators yourself of collaborative dialogue, that you model it. like you model sharing expectations as well. So what I mean by that is that you are providing information up front about the process. You are regularly keeping your stakeholders informed about what to expect in the next 6 months or the next year, right? So there's a modeling that needs to happen for other stakeholders to then go, oh, there's some, I see them doing that. That makes me want to do it more, right? Rather than they're not doing it, so why should I do it? Then working with power. So we're going to dive into that, but just to mention that, you know, there are many forms of power. It's really not easy to do this, but it's a reality in all of our work. And it's particularly strong in our work across value chains. And it really starts with, first of all, understanding what the power situation is, what the power dynamics are in your sector, in your multi-stakeholder collaboration. And then, you know, the next stage really is acknowledging it and acknowledging it with the stakeholders. But that you do that at a time where it's safe, not too early on, not too late. There's like a moment where it's like, okay, now's the time to acknowledge the power differentials in the room. And then also, you know, then of course, making efforts to work with it. And we're going to get into that in a minute as well. Then communicate effectively. So you could imagine what this means, but for example, like you said, Satako, what's our shared language? So if we come into the room with different understandings of different meanings for the same things, can we just identify, oh yeah, that all means that, and this is the shared language that we're going to work with and operate with? Shared participation promises to each other. So that could be things like we make sure that everybody gets time to speak. So there are these dominating voices. You can actually say, do we all promise to pay attention to what we could call airtime, right? Like I'm paying attention to if I speak too much, and I'm also paying attention to people who hardly speak at all as participants, not only as a facilitator, right? So if you just make that transparent and upfront, then you get more people supporting that process to happen. And I'll just share like one of the things that I learned the hard way was I had also when I was being the CEO of the Better Cotton Initiative, I had a multi-stakeholder board or steering committee. And I had 12 different organizations on my board. And some of them were farmer representative organizations from different countries in the world, like cotton farmer representatives from Africa, Asia, Latin America. I had retailers, you know, like apparel retailers. I had NGOs. And then I had traders, you know, people in the middle, traders like Cargill, Econ, those kind of things. And they were my decision-making body. And one of the things that I implemented in the end was every time we had a conference call, which was pretty regularly, like every 3 months, I would have specific proposals on the table that were sent in advance, and then people would give their comments, and then we'd see if they agree. And the way that I managed that is that I managed it very carefully. I was like, went around every single person, not in the same order, and I would say, okay, what's your input? What's your input? What's your input? So that everybody knew they were going to get their turn to speak, and every single person spoke on every single proposal. So it wasn't like, who wants to go first? It wasn't like, does anyone have anything to say? It was very like, you go, everybody gets their go, and then we discuss what's happened. Then we go again, do you agree? Do you agree? And they have to say yes or no, or I don't mind, right? So sometimes that's as far as you have to go that far, especially if it's virtual management. But it's just to give you an example of, eventually I was like, I have to do it like that to make sure that every voice gets their space. Because the farmer organization in Pakistan was less confident than the retailers, because that's how we work as well. So we'll get into that as well related to power. And then foster learning. So really looking at like experiential ways of learning, that everybody has experience and therefore everybody has something to offer, and that they get to be equal inside of that. And then also creating a safe space for people to share learning. You know, we learn the most from making mistakes. And if people feel in competition, or that something's negative is going to happen to them if they share honestly, then the learning doesn't get so deep and rich. So creating a safe space for that is important. And there can be many ways to do that, which we'll get into on another series. But often you might see, you might see people either only proving themselves, like, look how great I am, or look how great our organization is, or defending themselves, like, oh no, but we didn't do that, or we didn't know that, or that wasn't what we thought, we didn't understand that. So we want to kind of keep steering the space in the direction of not proving or defending, but really like, yeah, we made a mistake, or this was great, we learned this, and then we changed this, and actually I still have no idea how to fix this. Like that kind of dynamic is what we're looking for. And then I think, there are ways to do this, like every agenda of every meeting, you could set aside discrete time to specifically look at sharing learnings from people's projects or pilots, and you could rotate who gets to do that. That could also look like sharing videos from the field. Also in newsletters, you could keep showing, like have a learning spotlight in newsletters for your stakeholders. So there are lots of ways to do that as well. I'm just touching briefly on them. And then the last one, move through conflict. So really conflict is unavoidable in multi-stakeholder collaboration. It's going to happen. Sometimes you end up setting up multi-stakeholder collaboration in order to address conflict. But if you haven't done that, for sure it's going to show up at some point, right? I mean, has everybody had that experience? Just show your hand if you had experience with conflict in your work. Yeah. So really there are kind of two, as I mentioned, these two main types of conflict. And we're going to look at, when we dive into them, we'll look more at like the range of conflict, how one can work with conflict, how you might transform conflict, what kind of languaging and systems can kind of keep communication away from conflict, but just acknowledging like you have to move through it. You can't avoid it. There's no point pretending it's not there. You have to find a way to go through it and know that on the other side, things will be better, right? We have to know that with a particular way through, it will be better. And I really think that a lot of avoidance of conflict in the sectors that we work in, or avoidance of discussion, means that things just continue to be the same, right? Because it's like, oh, I just don't want to talk to them because they don't understand me, or they're never going to agree with me on this point, so I'm just going to ignore them. And then we just keep doing the same thing, like chopping the forest down, burning things, creating, keep doing the same thing because we're avoiding having difficult conversations. And multi-stakeholder collaborative processes are about having difficult conversations and creating something wonderful, right? Hopefully, that's the idea, something new and meaningful. So I'm just going to pause there, and I'm gonna give you time at the end to give questions. I just want to move through the power piece in a bit more detail. And so if you have questions right now that are buzzing in your mind, quickly write them down, or you can put them on the chat, and then I'll come back to them at the end when we do Q&A. Okay, because I don't want you to forget what they were. I'll just give you like a 30 seconds or so to write something down if you want. And nice to see you too, Carolina, if you have to go. You can move to the next slide, Matías. The one above. Yeah. All right, so you can just wrap up writing whatever questions you're holding. Thank you for holding them. And I chose this picture because I think often we think of power as negative. We associate it like with people using their power in a kind of non-generative, non-supportive way. But actually power can be awesome, right? It can be that you feel power because you are getting support from your friends, or you have the power of aliveness to take on new challenges, or move in new directions. And this is the difference between a power with, this is what we call power with, right? Or power to empower others. So it's just like to open up perspective around, oh, how could power actually be a force for good inside of multi-stakeholder collaboration? Not that we're going to totally go into why it also can be very destructive, but it can also be really good. So what's the shift that needs to happen from kind of negative use of power to positive use of power, right? So, you know, superpowers, like these little kitties here. Next slide, please, Matías. Yeah. So here, you know, one of the things that we talk about in the green commodities community is that, you know, we look at multi-stakeholder collaboration in terms of systemic change. So the whole system of palm oil in Indonesia, or the whole system of fisheries management in Costa Rica, or the whole system of cacao or cocoa in Peru has multiple relationships in it. And we see that collaboration is a way, in fact, one of the only ways that could really address what's going on in the system. And here's, you know, a couple of differentials. Well, I just want to say there's so many ways that people divide up power. Okay, I'm going to show you some other ones, but you can see it from multiple lenses, and there's no like right way or wrong way. So the question is really, you know, here's a few lenses that you can look at it with, and you take what's useful or going to work for you. So in this model, you see we have power over, when someone is trying to dominate someone else or shut someone else down or stops them from talking, for example. You have power under. This is often the appease, like kissing ass, we might say. You know, you've seen people like that in work who, you know, they try to appease power to get more power. You know what I mean? So they go and tell someone that they're really great, massage their ego, even if it's not true, right? Because that's a power underplay. And then there's this power from within as well. So as this quote says, you know, it's really not bad power or inherently good, but what matters is how we use it, and for what do we use it. So I'm just going to pause and attend to the comments. Yes. So culture will definitely influence how we handle conflict. Yes, that's true. Thank you, Rennie. Costa Rica, I know, Sandra's also a conflict avoidant culture. And so this often means that conflict needs to be addressed outside of the room, right? In one-to-one situations, in special mediated conversations. It's not necessarily something that you do in the room if a culture will not go there, right? So, but I will also take your feedback and put that more deeply into the working with conflict section that we'll have, the workshop that will focus on that. So thank you. Next slide, please, Matías. Yeah, so here are some other ways to look at it. You see this diagram here on the left. These are actually called sites of shaping, but they also have power forces that affect how people behave, how people see things, okay? So, for example, you could have, you know, you might go into a room and it might be the case that it depends, like I'd say, like in the United Kingdom, often depending on which university, so this institution level you went to, you might be granted more or less authority or power in a room. In terms of community, that might also be true. You have like classes of people in many countries, like the more economically rich class versus the more working class level. And then that creates power too, right? So in this community, you're seen at this level and you're seen at this level. And therefore, when you walk in the room, you're immediately viewed as having more or less power. This also happens in terms of social norms, historical forces, like, you know, women and men. Men walk in a room, they automatically seem to have more power than women. This applies in your context in different ways. So I'm just trying to highlight examples of what we mean here. These other bullet points are also other lenses and ways that you can look at power. Okay, so I'm just going to look at my notes here to make sure that I capture everything I want to tell you. So power by rank. So, you know, this can be social. I just mentioned some of those things. It could be situational, personal, economic. Let's say it's situational. For example, I'm the CEO and therefore I have more power than somebody who's my assistant, right? That's situational power. Or the bank manager has more power than you who puts your money in the bank. I'm not sure why that is the case, but that's how the world works, right? So the bank manager can decide he has more power than you over your money, basically. So that's also a situational example. Social could be gender-based, race-based, age-based, education-based, those kind of things. And then personal ones could be, for example, someone's more charismatic and therefore willing to speak and confident. Other people are conflict avoidant. We just talked about this culturally. Or you even have the economic side of it, which is, especially in a commodity supply chain, the retailer has the power, right? Because if the retailer says, I'm not going to give you any more contracts down the supply chain, that supplier, and then the knock-on effect of that, depending how close the retailer is concerned for their economic safety, right? Their commercial safety. So I added that because I think it's particularly relevant for us. Then there's power by knowledge, the whole other lens that's coming in. Who's the expert on this topic? Who claims to be the expert on this topic? Or who does everybody think the expert is on this topic in the room? Who's got more access to more information than other people? So it may be that you're working with indigenous groups or indigenous peoples, and they don't have so much access to information as, you know, the global representative of a big trader. And so this power differential of knowledge comes into the room too. And then as we mentioned, and you raised issues around language. So access to language and how are we attending to that too. We talked about power by legitimacy, power by physical or psychological violence. I mean, this happens not necessarily in our work, but not in the room anyway, but for sure it happens out in the field sometimes. So I just want to name it, and so we don't want to create situations where, or enhance situations where outside the room that might get worse or start happening when it shouldn't. And then there's a whole other lens, which is like, so much of it is visible, so much of it's hidden, as in people are hiding it, and the others are, a lot of it's just invisible power. So a lot of these power structures are actually in the society, they're like in the culture, in the fabric of the society. And they lock in certain patterns of behavior, they make people have certain ways of believing, belief systems. The ideas that they have are shaped by these power structures. And so it's one of those things to constantly be like, do I understand what is going on in my sphere, in my multi-stakeholder collaboration with the people that I'm working with, in the culture that I'm working with, in the context that I'm working with? Do I, platform coordinator, platform team, facilitator, know, first of all, do I understand what's going on all these different levels? Am I paying attention to them? And then the next step really is, if I'm paying attention to them, then how am I also bringing awareness to them? How am I making sure that they're acknowledged, right? Because just by acknowledging, just by even in a room, acknowledging that we have a language thing, we have some people are more expert than others, it just settles the room for those people who are like, oh yeah, I am more expert, and other people who are like, oh, I'm not so expert. But if you name enough things, it all becomes like, oh, I don't have, it's just helping people to be like, oh, I don't have all the power here, because even though I'm an expert on this, I'm not necessarily the boss, and I'm not necessarily confident, right? Or I might be super charismatic and confident, but I don't have the language and I don't have the authority. So all of these things are playing at different levels, and just by naming them, not even directly at people, you get more buy-in to like, oh, it's not all about me and my power. So how do I use it? And then really importantly in our work, because, you know, we want to be as inclusive as possible in this work, is about this power to empower others, okay, which is not here on the slide. But you'll see this quote at the top here, which is from a Margaret Wheatley book, and it's called, it says, "The powerful always defend the status quo because it is the source of their power and privilege. Any change that benefits others would destroy their position, and their position is all they care about defending." Okay, so this is why what we do is not easy to do. And also why we as organizations, whether it's UNDP, WWF, World Economic Forum, all of our organizations that are on the phone, we have the power to empower others. And that's a wonderful gift. It's a wonderful thing. So the question is, how do we do that? What are the tools and the tips that allow us to do that? I'm just going to jump to there. Matías, could you jump 2 slides down, please? Yeah, great. So a couple of things about working all of these things. So, and I will send a follow-up email with these bullet points in a list, and also a link to some more guidance materials and things online, as well as a recording of this video and the slides. But I want to highlight that this gets worked, the power gets worked outside the room as much as it gets worked inside the room. Okay, so it's paying attention to all these levels and angles, and also outside the room and inside the room. So outside the room, first of all, as we said, that you know what's going on. Do we know what's going on? Do we know who has power? And politics is basically the game of power, right? That's what politics is. So do you know what's going on? Do you need more information? Do you need to hire someone who can help you understand what's going on? Possibly. That you work in advance with the less influential stakeholders, right? So this is about the power to empower. And you know, we all know what this could look like. That can look like specific participatory consultations with smallholders, with indigenous peoples groups. It can look like free, prior, informed consent. It can look like having one-on-one conversations with people in advance of a meeting to make sure that they feel safe and understand their value, right? In fact, which is the next bullet point, so prepare less powerful individuals. I'll give you an example here. You know, I used to, when I was running these things myself, sometimes I'd be like, okay, I know the positions of the different people or the different sectors in the room on this particular topic. In this case, it was on restricting chemical use, right? And restricting chemical use tends to be there's a bit of a fight. Some farmers tend to want more chemicals, and the people who sell the chemicals want to sell more chemicals, but the NGOs don't want any chemicals. So, you know, it's a place of conflict, and also a place of, the people who have economic power over it tend to push harder because they have more interest around it. And so I would, actively encourage and meet with not-for-profits and say, it's really important that you bring this evidence into the room. The retailers need to hear it, or the buyers need to hear it, or the government needs to hear it. So it's also like looking and seeing that way so that you can prepare people, right, in advance. It might be fishermen that you need to work with to say, it's really important that you mention these things and you can do it, and you help prep them, that kind of thing. Then collaborative agenda setting. So who sets the agenda is a power move, right? So how do you make sure that the agenda of any meeting before you go into the room has a process where either you have a steering group that sets it, that's multiple stakeholder, or you send it out for consultation and comments before you have the meeting, that kind of thing. Then the inclusion of voices. So outside the room, inclusion of voices, this really requires budget, right? So you're thinking about, how do I actually include voices that either can't speak the language, so we need interpretation, or can't afford to come, so we need budget to bring them. All those things, that's what I mean by that. Also, that sometimes you need to do special, like you could even do videos of people and bring their voices into the room, but that needs to be prepared outside of the room, right, on specific topics. And then democratization of decision making, and I've put this outside the room and inside the room, because in multi-stakeholder collaborative processes, often you need like a steering group or a governance body of some sort, steering committee, and that the way that those decisions get made need to be as democratized as possible, in terms of you get to hear everybody's thoughts on all decisions or all proposals. And then inside the room, here's just a few things. Connecting first as humans. So, you know, when we started this call, the question I asked everyone was, what are you most looking forward to? And we got to feel each other inside of lots of people looking forward to vacation or travel or different things. And it's like, okay, well, that's the humanness of us. We're all just, ultimately, we're just human animals, right? Coming into a meeting. So really paying attention to, how do I bring that to the front at the beginning of dialogue? As we talked about, acknowledging the power at the right moment. I mentioned this idea of routinely asking each person to speak on each topic. Obviously, if your meeting's like hundreds of people, that's not where you can do that. But if it's a working group that's smaller, you could do that. Democratizing decision-making applies in the room and outside the room. The grid card process, which many of you have experienced, you know, in workshops with me, where everybody gets to reflect and write down their opinion or their thoughts on something before they share it, and then you go round and everybody shares it. Well, that means that you've addressed this issue of the dominating voice, or the person who doesn't want to speak up because they're worried about it, right? So the formulated small groups. I say formulated because very often, if I sense that there's power dynamics in this, which there always is, but if it's particularly strong and important to address, you decide in advance who's going in which group. So you pre-prepare, here's the working groups or the small group discussions, and here's who's in each group. So if you know that there's 3 people that really like to talk and aren't very good at listening and asking everybody else, then you put them with other people and someone strong enough to manage them and say, hang on, we haven't heard from everyone else. So to get to know your stakeholders well enough that you can formulate the groups rather than randomly get them formed, and then you end up with power playing out too strongly in some and not others. And then there's this open space methodology, which is a way that you allow the agenda to be set in the meeting rather than before the meeting. So this means that you create, like, maybe if you had a whole day, that would be great. But if it's half a day, where you say, okay, so what are all the topics that everybody in the room wants to talk about? You have a collection and a cluster process as a facilitator, and the people host conversations on those topics. And so the agenda is created by the participants, and then everybody goes away and has conversations around the agenda that they've created. And that's what open space methodology is. I've put ... on all of them because there are so many more. But I wanted to give you, you know, some concrete ways to address issues related to power. And I also know that in your context, there's all different ways that will work better than others, right? Depending on your culture and your context and your commodity that you're working in. Next slide, please, Matías, and then I'm going to jump to questions. So really, I just chose this image as like, this is what we're up to. When we're working with power, this is what we're up to. We don't want, everybody, we're not looking for equality, we're looking for equity. So we're looking, this is the step up, how do we have the power to empower? And so when we're working with power, this is what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to get into the equity side on the right-hand side of the diagram. Next slide, please, Matías. Great. So just to say, I'm going to send you the link to this. There are a lot more tools, specific facilitation tools on this Google Drive. I know some of you already know about this. And then, with this information, you can be like, this would actually really work in my context to address the kind of power that I'm experiencing in my work. And I know that we're very near the end of time. What I had wanted to do was to give you all time together in pairs to have a conversation about the power that you're seeing in your work, show how that power is showing up and what you might now do about it. So I know some of you have to leave. So if you can stay for 5 more minutes, anybody who can stay for 5 more minutes, we'll put you into those pairs. And for those of you who need to go in 2 minutes time, are there any questions that you want to ask me? Matías, if you could move to the next slide, please, as well. No? Okay, great. Well, let's put you in pairs then, and then we'll come back. And I just want, so the question is really, really consider how power is showing up in your multi-stakeholder collaboration processes, and what, based on this conversation and what you've heard me talk about, what you might do next, or what you might shift or change or consider moving forward. And Matías you can just do it randomly, Matías, so that it's quicker. Put you into pairs.
Very well, just a moment.
Great. So Andreas, Rifdan, and Bharati, if you see an invitation to join a breakout room, please go ahead. Hi, Matías. Did you see on the chat the broadcast?
Just a second.
Yeah. So we'll just give them another minute, Matías. All right, you can bring them back.
I already sent them the notification.
Great. Yeah?
We're all back.
Great. All right, so just a little like popcorn style, if anyone wants to share, maybe hear from someone we haven't heard from before. So could be Lavinia or Soraya or Nikki. I know you're driving, but what came up for you in terms of how it applies to your work, working with power?
Hi there.
I'm fine.
Oh,
Okay.
go Matías.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
don't worry.
No, it's Nikki.
Okay.
Yeah, Nikki, great.
Yeah, so in my work, especially with regards to sustainability certification, when we talk about palm oil, it's really hard to speak in public, and also to, when the government is present, to speak more about the RSPO, because the government has some kind of I don't know, if it's a negative sentiment of the global or foreign standards, because they want to strengthen the national standard, and that comes that becomes a very sensitive issue in the country when we speak publicly about that.
Right.
Yeah.
And did you have any thoughts about like a new way to work with that?
So basically, we use a more neutral language. So instead of saying that it's a RSPO, so we would say that in let's say responsible palm oil or sustainable palm oil in general. And of course, in some of the moments, we also mentioned that the national standard is also important, and we hope that the national standard can also be accepted by global market.
Great. Yeah, I mean, that's a great example of also what Saitoko was mentioning, is like making sure that the language that you use doesn't automatically make someone upset just because you use that word, you know. And sometimes we have to learn that the hard way. Like we have some bumps and we're like, ooh, that's not the right way to describe it, right?
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
using the right kind of language is really important. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else want to share?
I had a chat with Lucy.
Lucia.
Yeah, Lucia, yeah. And we were, like Nikki said, also for us, we were talking about market power and like the difference of power from between the demand sector and the production sector, and how like changing the way of consumption can actually empower also the production part of the supply chain. She's in Europe, but she's engaged with cocoa. She told me, so even like, I don't know, maybe cocoa small producer feel like powerless sometimes, but also changing the way that like consumer understand the traceability and the sustainability and the like a responsible consumption then could change like this feeling.
Great. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Lucia, do you want to add anything? You're on mute, Lucia, in case you are adding something.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, okay, great. Yeah, I think it's interesting. There's like, when I was working on cotton in West Africa, you know, we were beginning our multi-stakeholder collaborative processes, and we talked to quite a lot of people who'd worked in West Africa before on cotton, and there's a very old state, you know, all the private enterprises, all the businesses were still owned by the government, and they were in a process of like privatization away from the government. But basically producers, the government was business, and it was like they had all the power. And so we were actually advised by Oxfam, NGO Oxfam, who'd done a lot of work there, to first have only a meeting with West African cotton producers before we invited any other stakeholders, which we did. And that went a long way to build trust, helped us set agendas, understand power dynamics, work out like who should be invited to what, who should chair the meeting. So we had like the president of the Producers Association chairing the meetings after that, even though, you know, the supply chain was invited and traders were invited and the government, etc. So I think, you know, again, context, and also being flexible, you know, like how do we do this in a way that's going to make sure it works, and that there's all different ways to do that, basically. So thanks for bringing that. I'm conscious that we have time, but Nikki, go ahead. Yeah, if you want to say something.
Yeah. I forgot to mention that I had a chat with Sandra, and she also mentioned that when she faced she provided an example of a fisherman with the government. Sometimes the situation brings that the UNDP assistant doesn't seem neutral in front of the government face, because of UNDP is assisting less power group, which are the fishermen. And also, she found out that in some occasions or events, when the attendants are mostly male, so the males will be most likely dominating the discussion. Susandra, correct me if I'm wrong. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you, Nikki. Yeah, this is a situation with sometimes the government they feel that we are supporting the fishermen as a, but as you mentioned, I mean, we have to prepare the less powerful group. But since there is this big conflict, and also I was mentioned to Nikki, a power situation in the fishing sector with men and women. This is another particular situation. Thanks, Nikki, for bringing that.
I'll just say a couple of things about that. One is that, you know, if the potential of that is, you know, well, first of all, there's never a fully 100% neutral party. I think the United Nations is as close as you get to being a neutral broker in the world. But ultimately, we're still not neutral because we have human rights standards to uphold and labor standards to uphold and sustainability goals to work towards. And if we think that the government or any particular sector is going to react like, oh, UNDP is meant to be holding this space, you can always engage another organization to do the empowering to empower. So it could be, okay, well, we better not do it, but let's contract or pay or give money or whatever to Oxfam or to some social NGO or to someone that's their thing, they're experts at it, and say, could you lead this consultation process, right? So that's another way of sharing the load, if you want. And then on the, you know, the men and the women thing, it's just, there's all those lenses, right? All those power lenses, they're all the time. And it takes practice to watch for them all the time. Just we have to start saying, I'm going to watch for them. And then we have to start every time watching and seeing what we see in our work. So, Matías, could you just quickly show the last slide? So thank you all so much for your awesome participation and for coming. Just looking ahead, this is what we're planning and over the next year, probably a bit less than a year, but we're still finalizing the dates. So workshop 2 will dive into shared expectations. Workshop 3 will look at communicating effectively, and workshop 4, foster learning, and 5 will do move through conflict. And fingers crossed, I'm hoping once we start after the move through conflict workshop, we'll actually have a whole series of things around transforming conflict. And I'm going to bring in a few experts to help us with that. But we're still aligning funding to get that to happen. But I hope that will be the case. So you can email me. My email address is up here if you have other questions or things come up. And we'll send up a follow-up email, as we said, with the tools and tips, the recordings, and the links to the guidance. So wishing you all a good day or evening, and hope to see you back here in the community again soon. Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Lise.
Bye.
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 Bye.